Who is this year's Puka Nakuya? Who is that guy that down the board you can draft and he can save your fantasy lineup no matter how bad you draft in the early rounds? Well, we're not going to go that deep into the draft, but today we're going to be going through my rankings from 20 through 11 here because it's never too early to talk fantasy football. But if you enjoy, we're on the road to 18,000 subscribers. So drop a like, subscribe to the channel. That's enough yapping. Let's get into it. Starting off here with some honorable mentions. These are some guys to just keep in the back of your mind, and these guys can range anywhere from 21 to 30 on my rankings. But starting off here with a guy like Jaylen Waddle. Last year, he battled a lot of injuries, very inconsistent as far as playing time, and when he was on the field, didn't really get targeted as much as we wanted to see. This year, he's fully healthy, at least we suppose, and Tua is in a contract year. That means that he's going to have to play his best football yet if they don't get that contract situated. So, again, Tyreek is the clear number one in this offense, but Jaylen Waddle definitely has the potential and the talent to be a great wide receiver, too, on our fantasy teams. Same with DK Metcalf. He could arguably be your number one, but I'd say that's on the lower end of possibilities. But DK Metcalf, definitely number one in Seattle. It all depends on your belief of Geno Smith. Do you think he can come back and be what he was 2 years ago and lead this team to almost the playoffs? If you do, then DK Metcalf could be a dominant wide receiver one. If not, if you don't believe in Geno Smith, if you believe that he's going to play like he did last year, then I'd say DK is more so on the borderline of a top 15, top 20 wide receiver. Devontae Smith just got a huge contract. Shout out to him. The number two in Philadelphia. This offense should bounce back. Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs here at the bottom of the list. They could have easily both made the list. Nico Collins was actually right outside for me. It all just depends on, do you think that CJ Stroud's going to have 5,000 passing yards this year? If you think he can, then both of these guys could be easily low-end wide receiver ones, high-end wide receiver twos. But again, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, there's just a lot of mouths to feed and only one ball to go around. At number 20, we have Deebo Smith, the wide receiver 15 last year. And I'm going to read some stats off for you. He averaged 16 fantasy points a game. And of the 15 games he actually suited up for and played last season, 7 of them, so again, just about half, were over 20 fantasy point outings. And 2 of those games, he went over 30 plus. I think both of them were 35 plus. We know how explosive Deebo Samuel can be. He's coming back to the same situation as last year. But this year, I think this 49ers team is coming back with a chip on their shoulder, especially with how close they came to winning it all just last season. Ultimately, this is a team that their Super Bowl window with this exact core around Brock Purdy is not getting any bigger. So they're going to have to come back, be healthy, and be dominant. So I'm expecting the best year yet from this core. And of course, Deebo Samuel is at the storefront of all of that. So again, whether it's through the air or on the ground, Deebo Samuel should dominate. And number 19 might be a shock because it was a down season last year. But T. Higgins, I think a lot of the down season from last year can be chalked up to the mountain of injuries that this team faced, whether if it was Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins in his own right, the offensive line, or even, of course, the big guy in Joe Burrow. This team could not stay healthy for a good stretch of games outside of the first month of the year. But if we go back to 2 years ago when this offense was fully healthy, and yes, when you still have competition in a fully healthy Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow, T. Higgins was a wide receiver 15. So I have him here at 19, playing a little bit safe, and he's here because he's in a contract year. And whether if his future is in Cincinnati or elsewhere, this is a guy that's playing for a big contract. He's playing for a lot of money. And history tells us these are guys that typically have some of their best years of their career in the contract years because, again, they're chasing that big contract. And number 18 is going to be Drake London. He was the wide receiver 36 last year. So he's jumping up almost half the spots. And again, this is a name that probably doesn't jump off the page. But I'd say, being wide receiver 36 in an offense led by Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder, I'd say that's actually a pretty good season. But again, Drake London, he now has a completely different offensive scheme, head coach, and quarterback now in town with Raheem Morris's staff and Kirk Cousins leading the show. He's no doubt the number one in this offense, even with the addition of Darnell Mooney coming into town. So again, when we look at Kirk Cousins' career, he heavily targets the wide receiver ones, whether it was in Washington or whether if it was in Minnesota. Recently, Ja'Marr Chase or Justin Jefferson rather was just the number one wide receiver in fantasy just 2 years ago, and Kirk Cousins was his quarterback. Now, I'm not saying Drake London is on the caliber of receiver as Justin Jefferson, but the volume is there, and that's all we care about here in fantasy football. At number 17, I'm going to be a homer, and I'm going to say Amari Cooper because even with the carousel of poor quarterback play that this man had last year, he still finished as the wide receiver 20, and that includes missing 3 games. And let's not forget, Week 16, first round of the fantasy playoffs, he put up a 52-point performance that knocked myself out of the playoffs in a couple of leagues, and I'm sure many of you as well. But this is a guy that, again, is in a contract year, and with a returning Deshaun Watson, he's going to be running the show. Amari Cooper's going to be playing for his last big contract. Again, whether if it's in Cleveland or a different town. So he's going to have to come out and play his best football, regardless of the quarterback. But the biggest question to me is what version of Deshaun Watson are we going to get? That kind of determines the entire fantasy seasons for all of these Browns players here in 2024. But if we can, I think if Watson can come back and just be Flacco Watson, as I like to say on this channel, if he could just take his checkdowns, protect the football, and just be 70% of what he used to be, I think Amari Cooper can not only meet this wide receiver 17 mark, I think he can push his way into the top 10, as crazy as that might sound. At number 16, there's always got to be a rookie. There's always got to be that new shiny toy that every fantasy player is chasing. I'm not there yet with Marvin Harrison, but again, we have some months until the fantasy season. Maybe I'll come around. But Marvin Harrison, he's walking into a great situation there with a good quarterback in Arizona. Now, his team physically might not win a lot of football games, but for fantasy people, they should be an offense that's down a decent amount in their games, and they might have to throw a lot. Marvin Harrison might rack up a lot of points, especially in the second half of games. But I've seen a lot of people have him as high as like 7 on their list so far. So you might be asking me, Owen, why do you have him this low on your list? Why are you not high on maybe the best prospect at receiver we've ever seen here in the National Football League? Well, I don't believe this is going to be an air-raided offense. I don't believe it's going to be a pass-heavy offense like many are expecting. We saw last year when Kyler Murray returned to the field, we saw how run-focused they were. And, of course, the run opens up the play action. And that's just how that offense is designed to run. And again, we saw how they drafted, getting Trey Benson, the running back out of Florida State. They drafted some offensive linemen heavily in the 3rd round, and also some blocking tight ends down the board. After all, John Gannon, the head coach of this team, is under the Shanahan-McVay tree. So that's just how this offense is going to work. It's going to be a run first, open, have the run, open up the play action later. And again, Marvin Harrison can still have a great rookie season. He's the number 1 wide receiver in an offense that just lost Marquise Brown, and all of those targets are now open for Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison to take. But again, I just don't know if it's going to be I think it'll have a good rookie season. I just don't know if it'll be great, like many are expecting. So that's why he's at number 16 for me. But again, he could easily be way higher on this list. But moving into the top 15, well, let's talk about a former teammate of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Chris Olave. Again, former teammate of him. But Chris Olave finished as the wide receiver 16 last year. So I have him finishing it just about the same because he was healthy last year and he's coming back to practically the same exact situation. A situation where out of the 16 games he played last year, 10 of them, he had 15 plus fantasy point outings or more. I still think that he has that next gear to him because he's such a talented wide receiver and player. I still think he has that next gear where he can go up to maybe 20 fantasy points a game and be in that elite status where he's pushing top 10 to top 5 every single season. But again, he's going to the same exact situation this year. Same quarterback and aging weapons around him, especially guys like Alvin Kamara. And to me, if anything happens to a guy like Alvin Kamara, who's going to take those extra targets out of Chris Olave's hand? All we need is Chris Olave to stay healthy, and this is a guy that can be a top 15 wide receiver. At number 14, it is the wide receiver 10 from last season, Davante Adams. And again, wide receiver 10 for Davante Adams has actually been a down year for him here in his shorter career. But this is a guy that when he was healthy last year, he was dominant. And now he has an upgrade at quarterback going into next season. I would just love to see this dude personally with a better quarterback, or at least in a better situation. But because again, when he was with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, he was dominant for so many years. So it's hard to see this guy slip down these rankings. But again, the only problem with Davante going into this year is his range on a week-to-week basis between his ceiling and his floor. Because last year he had 4 weeks where he had 5 or under fantasy point outings, but he also had 5 weeks where he went over 20 fantasy points in a single week. So to me, his range is very big, but Gardner Minshew as a better quarterback should shore up those floors and bring them up a little bit. But honestly, to me, it doesn't matter if I was the quarterback out there for Davante Adams. He's going to be a top 20 wide receiver. He's going to find a way to make me an NFL, I guess, caliber quarterback and finish again top 20 yet again. So Davante Adams, I think this is probably the sweet spot. I wouldn't say it's his floor, but I definitely wouldn't say it's his ceiling. I'd say it's a sweet spot here at number 14, playing it on the safer side. At number 13, the wide receiver 7 from last year. I joke around all the time because when Mike Evans plays me in fantasy, it always seems like he has his best years on the season. I promise you, over the last 3 years especially, every single time that he's had a boom game, it's been when he's faced me in fantasy football. So I'm just this dude's biggest motivation here on a yearly basis. But again, he averaged about 17 fantasy points a game last season. Elite status. He is Mr. Consistency. This is a guy that didn't miss a single game last year, and he has had yet again another season where he's put up at least 1,000 yards. This is a guy that's been dominant in his career so far. But I know this ranking might seem a little bit low, saying that again he was the wide receiver 7 last year, and it's basically the same exact situation. I just don't believe that this offense is going to be as good. Again, regular season wise, they weren't great, but I don't know if Baker's going to play at that same level, that Pro Bowl level yet again. And I hope he does, but I just don't believe he will. So with that mindset, I think all these Buccaneers players in my rankings are going to take a little dip as far as where I would have them at their ceiling. And Mike Evans to me falls to 13. But again, that's borderline wide receiver 1. Could easily be your wide receiver 1 if you go running back heavy early on in your fantasy drafts. But again, if you want to have him as a top 10 guy, I'm not going to call you too crazy for it. At wide receiver 12, I have the wide receiver 24 from last season on a per game basis in Cooper Kupp. This is the guy that dealt with a lot of injuries throughout last season, and just luckily for the Rams, they found yet another hidden gem in Puka Nacua to come in and keep that team afloat. But again, Cooper Kupp missed 5 games last year, and I'd say in another 5 of those, he wasn't fully healthy, battling a lot of injuries in his own right. But I just want to jog your guys' memory because often we let recency bias kind of blind us as far as fantasy football players. And 2 years ago, for 2021, when we look at the season that Cooper Kupp had, not only was it a good season, not only was it a great season, it was a legendary season. He arguably had the greatest fantasy football season by one individual ever that we've ever seen in fantasy football. He averaged 26 fantasy points a game. That was almost 5 more points than the next wide receiver on a week-to-week basis. That is legendary stuff. And then we look into 2022, the season after that legendary Triple Crown year. The first half of it, before the injuries came, he had 9 straight weeks where he didn't score under 22 fantasy points. That is legendary. That is absurd numbers. So when this dude is healthy, he is a top 5 wide receiver. But I will say with the emergence of Puka Nacua and how great he looked and all the records he broke in his rookie season, I'll say this. I'll say Cooper Kupp is still a wide receiver 1. He's just on the lower end of it, just with the emergence of a guy like Puka Nacua. But again, I would love to have this guy as my wide receiver 1. If I went running back heavy or a tight end running back, I would definitely not be mad that Cooper Kupp was my wide receiver 1 in rounds 2 or 3 down the board. And to close off the list here is DJ Moore. We finally got that great year from DJ Moore last season as he was the wide receiver 6 throughout the entirety of it. But just like Davante Adams, DJ just had a wide range last season. But again, some weeks he had Tyson Bagent, some weeks he had Justin Fields. Very inconsistent quarterback play, so that's why I give this a pass. But still, I want to throw it out there. He had 3 weeks last year where he had under 5 fantasy points. But he also had 3 weeks where he had over 30 fantasy points on a single week-to-week basis. Let's not forget that 49-point performance he had early in the year against the Commanders. That so happened happening against me in many of my fantasy leagues. But DJ now comes back with, year 2 under the same scheme, same head coach, and he is now a generational prospect and player at the quarterback position in Caleb Williams. This offense should be electric. They should be putting up tons of points, and they should be an air-rated offense. And DJ Moore, again, is that the storefront of all of that. He's the number 1 option in this passing attack. My only worry is the competition that he does have, and of course, everybody, that's going to be their biggest worry with DJ Moore, with Keenan Allen now in town, with Rome Odunze, with Cole Kmet, with DeAndre Swift. We know DJ Moore is going to be fine, but can he be elite? Can he be worth that first wide receiver taken off the board slot? I don't know. I think there's 10 other guys with a better argument over DJ Moore due to competition or situation, whatever the case may be. But that's why he's down here at number 11. But again, if you want to have him top 10, just like many other guys on this list, of course, I'm not going to fight you too hard. But that's going to do it here for today's episode. The wide receivers 20 through 11. Of course, on Wednesday, we're going to do tight ends, and then we're going to dive into the top 10s. And then I would say then it's officially not too early to do some mock drafts. So we'll dive into that and all the great stuff here on the channel. But if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. And again, we drop everything fantasy football 2 times a week. If you enjoy, join the channel. But until Wednesday, stay happy, stay healthy. Get out of here.